intro into continental style 2-color brioche, we need 2 contrasting yarns, 2 DPNs or a circular needle. We're going to start by casting on an odd number of stitches with a long tail cast on. The odd number is just for symmetry reasons. You could do it with an even number as well. I used a lighter color, which will be in the foreground for my cast on. The first and the last stitch of every row will be a selvage stitch, so there is now 9 stitches for the pattern, for the brioche pattern, and 1 on each side for the selvage stitch. Our first row is going to be a setup row where we establish those yarn overs that are so characteristic for brioche. You see there's only single loop stitches on our needles, and we start our setup row by knitting the first stitch. And the next stitch is already our first basic brioche stitch, a slip-on yarn over. And for that, we're going to bring the yarn to the front and insert the needle purlwise and slip the stitch purlwise. And then bring the yarn over the needle to the back for the slip-on yarn over part. The next stitch is a simple knit stitch. The next stitch is going to be another slip-on yarn over stitch, but I'm going to show you how to do it in one motion. The first one I showed you was 2 steps, but this is a simpler way to do it. So you insert the needle purlwise with the yarn in front, and then you slip the stitch and the yarn both to your right hand needle. So the yarn crosses to the back of the work, and then you can knit the next stitch. And then bring the yarn to the front again, and again insert the needle purlwise into the stitch and slip both the stitch and the yarn to the right hand needle. And you can knit the next stitch. And you can see every other stitch is a slip-on yarn over. Slip-on yarn over and another knit stitch. And then there is one last slip-on yarn over stitch at the end of our row. And because our last stitch of the row is a selvage stitch, a slipped stitch selvage, we now need to bring the yarn under the right hand needle to the front again and slip the selvage stitch purlwise. And when I spread out the stitches here on the needle a little, you can see that every other stitch is a single loop, and every other stitch is one that has those doubled loops. So this one has the yarn over that crosses over it. So there's a stitch here in the middle, and the yarn over that crosses diagonally from the front to the back of the stitch. And the stitch and the yarn over that crosses over it are considered one single stitch, so one item. And you would count them as one stitch, and you would also treat them as one stitch. So you knit them together, and we'd also slip them together later on for decreases. So let's turn around and start our first full brioche row, where we get to know the second basic brioche stitch, a brioche knit. But first we start with a knit 1 selvage stitch. So we continue with our first color, knit the first stitch, and then we reach a stitch that has those 2 loops. So the stitch and the yarn over that crosses over it. And whenever there are those 2 loops for the stitch, you know that you need to work them. And in this case, we're going to work this as a brioche knit stitch. So insert the needle and knit the stitch together with its yarn over. So there's the motion is similar to knit 2 together, but because we don't have an actual decrease here, we call it brioche knit. And the next stitch you see is a single loop stitch, and that tells you that it needs to be slip 1 yarn over stitch. It works just like the way I showed you before. And then another brioche knit. Then we bring the yarn to the front again, and slip the stitch, the single stitch with its yarn over to the right hand needle. You can brioche knit the next stitch, bring the yarn to the front again, and slip one yarn over. Brioche knit and slip one yarn over. And the last brioche knit stitch. And then we bring the yarn to the front for our selvage stitch. And slip the selvage stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So the first row of brioche is almost finished. So this is the first worked row, but in brioche we always need to work 2 passes for each row. So we just worked 1 pass with that one color, and now it's time to work a second right side row, a second pass of the right side with our second color. So we hold on to the stitches and you push the needle through. In this case, it's a short distance to the other tip of the needle, but if you have circular needles, it will be a longer way to go. So here we now attach our second color, so we can work a second pass of the right side row. So you simply hold the tail end a little in place so it doesn't move around too much. And then you knit the first stitch, the selvage stitch. And then we work this row with slip one yarn over stitches and brioche purl stitches. So this is the third basic stitch that we get to know in this row. So we bring the yarn to the front. This is the single looped stitch that we work as a slip one yarn over. And the yarn is in back now, but the next stitch you can see the purl bump here. So this is one that we are going to work as a brioche purl stitch. So we need to bring the yarn between the needles to the front again, so we can work this stitch here as a brioche purl stitch. So bring the yarn to the front and brioche purl the stitch together with its yarn over. The yarn is already in front now from the purl stitch, so what you do now is you simply insert your needle purlwise into the next stitch and work this slip one yarn over stitch. The yarn is in back again from the slip one yarn over, and you need to bring it to the front again so you can work another brioche purl stitch. This next stitch is again a slip one yarn over, then bring the yarn to the front and brioche purl. Bring the yarn to the yarn is already in front, slip one yarn over, brioche purl. Slip one yarn over and bring the yarn to the front and slip the last stitch purlwise. So we have 2 passes of the right side row finished. You can see that both tail ends are on one side. This is your cue to turn your work around and switch colors again. So we continue now with the gray. The gray is the one that I had in the first pass of the right side row. And I'm also using it for the first pass of the wrong side row. I'm starting again here with a knit one selvage stitch. And when I look closely here, the first stitch is one of those doubled stitches with the yarn over traveling over it. So I need to work it, and then I look closely and I see this purl bump underneath here. And that tells me that I'm going to work it as a brioche purl stitch. So insert the needle purlwise through the stitch and the yarn over, and then I brioche purl the stitch together with its yarn over. And we continue like this with slip one yarn over, brioche purl to the end of the row. Slip one yarn over, brioche purl. slip-on yarn over, brioche purl, slip-on yarn over, brioche purl. And before the selvage stitch, the yarn is already in front, so I can simply slip the selvage stitch purlwise to the right hand needle. So one of my working yarns is on one side and one is on the other, and I need to switch colors again, so I need to get to this point here, and to do that I slide all my stitches to the other tip of the needle, so I can start here with my pink yarn. I work a second wrong side row with my pink yarn, and I start again with a knit one selvage stitch, and the single looped stitch are the ones that I work as slip-on yarn overs. So I bring the yarn to the front and slip-on yarn over. The next stitch is one of those doubled stitch that has the yarn over, and I look below here on my needles on the work, and I see this little V here from the knit stitch, so I know it needs to be worked as a brioche knit. And then I continue with slip-on yarn over, brioche knit, slip-on yarn over, brioche knit to the end of the row. One last slip-on yarn over here, and then I bring the yarn to the front again so I can slip my selvage stitch with yarn in front. I pull a little to tighten here the tail ends, and I have just finished both passes of my wrong side row. Both working yarns are on the same side again, so I can turn around, and I now could continue with another set of right side rows. You can see that the knit stitches here are in the gray, so the gray is dominating on this side, and on the other side the pink is dominating because the knit stitches are in pink. So one side is gray, one side is mostly pink. And that's the basics of two-color brioche.